Hi guys, I've been a driving instructor for 22 years and I want to make this quick video about how long you need your driving lessons to be so you can learn properly. So it's very standard for a driving instructor to sell their lessons in an hour and a half and 2 hour lessons. Okay, so that's pretty standard. However, driving lessons can be sold at any length of time. So you could have a driving instructor that sells at 30 minutes because you might just want to go off and just do some manoeuvres. You don't want to do any driving. You've got your test coming up and you just need to go and do the Bay Park or the Parallel Park or something. So you could buy a lesson at 30 minutes, but you'd have to talk to your instructor about that because that's kind of like now a bespoke lesson. Now, people sell in 3 hours, and sometimes that's because they live quite far away from a test centre. So you'll find that people will have 3 hours because they need to get to an area and it takes them quite a long time to get to that area, and then they can practice in the area for a significant amount of time so they know the test routes. I've never sold in 3 hours because I don't need to, and my working area is quite close to my test centre, so I don't need to do that. So I sell personally in 1 hour, 1.5 and 2 hours. However, I've only started really selling 2 hours again after COVID, because before COVID I actually didn't sell them. There was a time when I entered the industry and I worked at BSM all those many moons ago. They only sold them in 2 hour slots, I seem to remember. It's a long time ago, but a lot of students were just sold 2 hour slots. And after a while, I started to notice that the last half an hour was actually sometimes a waste of money because the student just can't. It's so intense, yeah. I mean, you can, from where I live in Cheltenham, you can drive to London in 2 hours. That's an extremely long time. And when I drive to London, I'm tired when I get there, and I'm a driving instructor. So if you're learning a new skill and driving, I've noticed that the last half an hour can be very difficult and sometimes a total waste of time. So I personally like selling an hour and a half if the student is trying to learn quickly. Now, I'm not saying I do sell 2 hour lessons, and I'm not saying for a moment that I wouldn't sell them, because I am doing 2 hours, but I monitor it very carefully. And if I can see that the student is losing their concentration on a 2 hour lesson once or maybe twice, I recommend to them that they should go down to an hour and a half. 2 hour lessons are quite good at the very, very beginning, right? Because especially on the first lesson, if you can afford it, an hour and a half or a 2 hour lesson is a good idea, because the first lesson you're going to be talking about all the controls of the car, and to be honest, that takes quite a long time. If you've never sat in the front seat at all, you need to talk about the pedals, you need to talk about the handbrake, you need to talk about where all the windscreen wipers are, all the demisting systems. You need to know about all the functions of the car, all the ancillary controls and stuff like that, and that takes time. So if you're having an hour-long lesson on your first lesson, you're barely going to be moving. If the driving instructor is teaching you in the right way, in the way that we've all been taught to be a driving instructor, the first lesson is called a controls lesson. This is really important because the student needs to know where all the things are, and they also need to understand how the instructor is going to talk about these things and how maybe their feet should be set up correctly with the pedals, literally how the foot should be positioned, how to use the gear stick with a palming technique, how to put the palm in different directions. So in the long run, you're going to be able to select the correct gear. So I don't recommend a hour-long lesson for your first ever lesson unless you've had experience in a car before. I know it's expensive, guys, and I understand, right? I do understand. It is incredibly expensive, and I do feel sorry for everybody, really. The price of driving lessons have gone right up after COVID because there is a real call out for it, okay? And it's difficult for people to stay at a cheap rate because every driving instructor in the area will be charging a certain amount, and everybody balances out in the end. Because if somebody's had 22 years experience like myself, and then a brand new instructor comes in and they've just passed their tests and they're charging £15 more than somebody who's got 22 years of experience, it doesn't work. Yeah. So the student everybody's going to balance out with their payments, yeah, in the end, because people are going to be talking in the test centre. How much are you charging? Oh, I charge, £50 an hour. Do you? How long have you been in the industry? 6 months? Oh, right. I've got 22 years experience and I'm charging 35. You can see how this is a problem, right? Because lots of people come into the industry and they're going to want to charge the maximum amount, and that's fine. Like, of course, right? But people who have got a lot of experience are going to look at that and go, well, I really know what I'm talking about, And there's grading systems. There's grade A instructor and there's grade B instructor, right? And if there's grade A's, like myself, and then you've got, somebody who's a grade B who's just passed and they're charging £15 more an hour, it doesn't really work. Also, if you do decide to be a cheap driving instructor, clients will look at that online and go, why is that person, £35 an hour and this other person's £55 an hour? What's wrong with the person who's £35? So you actually don't get clients if you go to a cheap version, because people wonder what's wrong with you. So that's why we're all really expensive, because after COVID, the prices went up and then everybody balances, right? So that's the reason why we're all very expensive, okay? So if you are having a first lesson, I recommend that you have the very first lesson. If you can afford it, try and do an hour and a half. Yeah, because your driving instructor is going to have to pick you up. They're going to have to drive you somewhere. Then they're going to they're going to look at your license. They're going to check your eyesight. And then you're going to then go through all of the controls of the lesson, of the car, sorry. And that takes time. So if you want to drive on your first lesson, I'd strongly recommend that you try and, get the hour and a half, okay? 2 hour lesson on the first one. Yeah, that obviously that can work as well, because there's all that talking at the beginning. After that, if you're going to be getting into the car, no more controls lesson is going to be spoken about, right? So when you get into the car on your second lesson, you're going to turn the car on straight away and you're going to start driving straight away. There is no more controls lesson. You've already done that. You're moving on to the next thing, right? So when you are starting to drive the car, it would then be unique to you whether you can hold your concentration, right, for that amount of time. If you do feel like you want to learn to drive quickly and you do want long lessons, and you're like, no, I really do want to have a 2 hour lesson, then feel into it, yeah? Make sure that you have actually got your concentration for that last half an hour, because it's extremely expensive. You're looking at about £25 for that last half an hour, right? Is it worth £25? Have you got your concentration for that last half an hour? Could that £25 be spent on something else? Because if, I say to my students, sometimes I see my students' brain falling out of their ears, like something I've said a lot, because the people find it hard to concentrate. The first few lessons, if people can handle it, 2 hours are excellent, because we can really get a lot done. But it does depend on whether the student can hold the concentration, because it's very expensive. Hour and a halves, with the memories that I've got from my 22 years of experience, I find that hour and a halves are excellent. I really feel that my student is with me the entire time. They learn until the end, and we are with each other. We are connected, we are communicating, we are doing very well, right? So I love hour and a half lessons. I think they are fantastic. If the student is coming up to driving test, and then they have all their manoeuvres under their belt, they can do 2 hour lessons again, I've noticed, because half of the lesson you can do manoeuvres and then half of the lesson you can do on driving. And this is nice because, yes, it's a long lesson, but because we've got different things to concentrate on now rather than just driving for 2 hours, which is very tiring, I do find that 2 hour lessons work when you have the manoeuvres in your repertoire of driving, okay? So 2 hour lessons at the very, very beginning, yes, and then 2 hour lessons when your test is coming up. I do find that that's good. If you want to have 2 hour lessons whilst you're in the actual process of driving, I would really just feel into it, use your senses. How did you find that last half an hour to be? Did you have your concentration? Were you able to listen and take in the information and then deliver? So The last half an hour for people who are losing their concentrations, this is what happens in my experience over the 22 years, right? People start making mistakes, they start stalling, they start not being able to take in the information that I'm saying to them, and it is extremely noticeable. They start making mistakes, and I always feel bad about this, because if they are starting to make mistakes with the last half an hour, unfortunately the student will start to feel like they didn't do very well when they have done very, very well for the first 1.5 hours. They've done exceptionally well, and then they finish it off with this kind of half an hour of like, oh, this is going a bit pear-shaped. And it's bad, as a driving instructor, I don't want my student to go home and feel like, oh no, I didn't do very well. I want them to be uplifted. I want them to be confident. I want them to be like, yeah, I can do this, like I'm a flipping legend. I want them to be absolutely buzzing. I want them to go home with a smile on their face. I want them to go into their parents' house or wherever, and they go, oh man, I just had the best lesson, and Ros gave me a gold star today because I'm awesome. That is where I want my students to be. I do not want my students to be going in and being like, oh man, I just totally ruined like a traffic light, or I didn't oh man, it was really bad. I'm not interested in that at all. There's so much work, it is not necessary for me to like give 2-hour lessons to people if they're not able to concentrate at the end. There's somebody else that I can see. The waiting lists of all driving instructors are just longer than like one of those shows when somebody just goes, these are my credentials, and they open their wallet and it just spills out onto the floor nobody in the driving instruction world doesn't have a waiting list because of COVID, right? So if you're not able to take in this information for the last half an hour, don't have 1.5 hour lessons. I don't sell crash courses. I don't do it. I've never done it. I find it, even the idea of it, stressful. If somebody hasn't driven on the Monday and then they've got their test on the Friday, I can't see how that is a safe way of learning to drive. I really don't get it. I would need to have a conversation with somebody who does crash courses to understand how that is a safe option. As a person, if I got into somebody's car on a Saturday and they went, oh my God, I passed yesterday and I'd never driven before at all. Monday, never even sat in a car, Ros. And like, now we're going to Scotland together. How cool is that? That sounds a bit worrying to me. Learning, you need to sleep all your short-term memories into your long-term memories. Sleep is very important in between lessons. If somebody says that they want to have 2 lessons a week with me, I would say have it on the Monday and the Friday, because we need some sleep to be there. We need to sleep all of those short-term memories into that long-term memory. And sometimes when people have had a long break, it's weird. Sometimes actually having a reasonably long break, sometimes they're brilliant. They come back and they're like, flipping hell, I'm excellent. What the hell? Like, I'm really, really good. And I'm like, it does happen sometimes, having that break, because you're sleeping everything into your subconscious mind. And actually you can be really, really good after a short, longish break. I know that sounds weird, but like, I'm not talking like years, I'm talking about like a longish, shortish break, like a month, sometimes 6 weeks, if somebody has been on holiday or whatever, it can be actually quite cool. So also, I have been with students and I can see that they're losing their concentration, and it has been that I can see that they're about to waste money. When this happens, I do say to them, would you like to stop now, and we'll call this lesson 1.5 hours instead of entering the next half an hour where you'll have to pay. That happens quite a lot. I am very protective over my students' money. I have a high respect for it. I don't need it because I've got another person to go and see. I have huge respect for the people that sit in my car. I understand about money. I'm a 43-year-old woman soon, right? I've got a house, I've got bills, I've got children, right? I know how important that last £25 is and where it can be spent in your life. You do not need to spend it with me if nothing is going to be retained in your memory about what you're learning, right? I know that this is kind of... just have a very good relationship with your driving instructor. Don't spend loads of money on somebody who's giving you a hard time and making you feel bad about your mistakes. If I went to a trampoline lesson and I made mistakes, I would not expect my instructor to shout at me. I would never go back. It is not on. Learning to drive or learning any skill, you should be held with high respect, and any mistakes that you make should be private between you and your driving instructor, right? Unless you choose to share them with your friends, it is a private space. That is why on this channel, I never show a student making mistakes. I will not do it. I will not be doing mock tests and ripping people apart on this channel. I am holding people with a high amount of respect and privacy, and what happens in the car stays in the car unless they choose to go and tell somebody about it. It's got nothing to do with me. I will not be telling other people about people's mistakes, okay? I will, well, to their friends, people who know them, right? I tell people about general mistakes because that is extremely useful, but I won't name people. I won't say, oh, Beth, like, went, stopped at a green light the other day or whatever. It's what happens in the car is, and also, do you know what? If your driving instructor has been a driving instructor for a long time, we've seen it all before. It's not really like one of my students, like yesterday, he said to me, oh my God, wasn't it awful when we went to the hills recently? And I'm like, was it? Like, I just can't remember. I have no recollection of that because those hills, everybody struggles with. It's not really, it's a big deal for you, but that's my job. I'm on those hills all the time. People are constantly getting those hills wrong. And there's an element of embarrassment and like, oh God, I can't do it. But everybody struggles. We're all human. We pretty much all make the same mistakes. We say the same things. We make the same mistakes. It's absolutely amazing, to be completely honest with you, because we all literally do the same things. And that's why we can be instructors. That's why we can be teachers, because we're all the same. We just pretty much do the same things all the time. So don't worry about your mistakes in the car. If you've been with a driving instructor for many years, they won't even remember the next time, unless you had a huge conversation about it and it was really a massive deal. If a tiny little mistake has been made, like a stall or something, your driving instructor is not even going to remember. Not even going to remember, all right? So I strongly suggest that when you get a driving lesson, okay, it is at least an hour. Yes, I think you should have an hour lesson at least every week, yeah. You can learn to drive every other week. It is possible, but of course it will take longer. I don't recommend one lesson every 3 weeks. That is too long. I think that the maximum that you can stretch it out is one lesson every 2 weeks. I think it is possible for that to happen, but I strongly recommend that you try and drive in your spare time, right? Of course, it's very expensive. I totally understand, right? But I have taught people to drive every other week and they can get there, right? That is a possibility, okay? So if you can afford it, 1 hour every week would be fantastic. If you can afford to have an hour and a half on your first lesson, strongly recommend, right? Because of the chatting on the first one about the car's controls. And then after that, if you are very keen and you want 2 hour lessons, just please monitor your own feelings and whether you've been able to hold concentration for that last half an hour. Otherwise, it's just a total waste of money. You may as well do an hour and a half and save that £25 and put it into a future driving lesson. And I promise you that will be a lot better if you just hold that £25 for another day, later on in the week perhaps, and stuff like that. Okay, so that's my recommendation here, guys. So I really hope that helps you, and I hope that gives you some insight about what's going on here. And hopefully, if you want to keep the cost of this all down, I strongly recommend getting insured on somebody's car that you know, and then go to all the places that you are capable of doing, with somebody else. Don't go and do new subjects with somebody who's not a driving instructor unless you feel that you're very safe, okay? Sometimes when I've taught people to drive over the years, and I've just literally help them move off and stop, and then they go off and do roundabouts in between lessons, that's quite advanced. Yeah, we just need to go up the staircase of learning. Make sure that you learn in a careful and safe environment. There are a lot of accidents that happen with people learning to drive in their own cars. There's a lot of statistics online. Just be careful. You know, if your driving instructor has taught you how to turn left and right, then do that with your accompanying driver. Go to the same place and learn those things with your accompanying driver. Yeah, try not to step forward unless you feel very, very safe with the accompanying driver, and you're really tiptoeing out to the next subject in a very, very safe way. Okay, we need to keep everybody safe on the road because your accompanying driver cannot stop the car. Yeah, your driving instructor's got dual controls for a reason. Yeah, so we can step out and safe mistakes can be made. Yeah, and we can look after you, right, and everybody else. So if you feel frightened or scared, like just pull back and go, do you know what? You know, I feel like I'm a bit out of my depth here with your accompanying driver, and just say, look, I just feel like we should just stick to the left and the right turns. I don't feel like we should go and do roundabouts, okay? Let me do that with my driving instructor. I do appreciate that people learn to drive completely solely with an accompanying driver, and fair play to them. I've got a lot of respect. You know, the only reason why I'm so calm and very, very chilled in the car is because I've got driving controls. Yeah, I can drive from the left-hand side of my car extremely easily, and I can leave it until the last minute for my student to be making mistakes, and I can just be like, I've got you. I'm in control now, yeah, and that makes me feel very chilled. If I didn't have controls, I think I would be very much on edge all the time, and I'd be like, slow down. You know, even as a driving instructor, I would probably be neurotic. Yeah, I need those controls to be as calm as I am, and to be as just relaxing, like it's a spa in my car. You know, it's just like zen. You know, we have a nice time. Me and my students are chilled. Me and my students are happy. Me and my students are, you know, we're respected, and there's a lot of respect in the car, and peaceful and calm, right? So practice in your own car. Get a car, practice in it. You know, get somebody else to take you out and practice what you've done with your driving instructor. And yeah, do it that way. That's another way of keeping the cost as far down as possible. All right, guys, I hope that this video helps you, and I'll see you on the next one.